hope is this belief that we can build better tomorrows than today. So I can just get really
Mm.
overwhelmed by how big everything is because it's everywhere. And so what I commit myself is, how can I be my best to make tomorrow better and contribute as much as I can there? And I'm just learning the power of trying to take it a day at a time. And that in that day of pushing, 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 also having the space for healing, community, joy, music, all the things to be able to push, push, push again, moving forward.
Welcome back to Impostrix Podcast. My name is Whitney Knox Lee, and I'm your host. This is Season 3 of Impostrix Podcast, where we are focusing on validating small business owners of color, entrepreneurs, and folks who unfortunately are navigating employment discrimination in their workplace. Impostrix Podcast always puts folks of color first. So all of our guests are people of color who are sharing about their personal experience or their learned experience. So buckle up, let's go. Welcome back to Impostrix Podcast. I am here today with Whitney Parnell. Yes, we share names. I don't know about you, Whitney, but I was named after Whitney Houston. Do you have a story with your name?
No, but Whitney Houston is my favorite artist of all time, and I feel so deeply connected to her. So already now we have
Oh,
a triangle of connection already now.
yes.
uh, so I wasn't
Yes.
necessarily named after her, but she is very much loved in the Parnell household and by Whitney Parnell.
Yeah, my mom told me, and I am of that generation. You know, my mom grew up only listening basically to Whitney Houston and Mariah Carey, and
Mhm,
or not my
mhm.
mom grew up, but like in my childhood, that's all I heard.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, I am looking forward to this conversation for a number of reasons. A season 1 guest, Carrie and Suarez, suggested that I reach out to Whitney because I guess Carrion just knew that you had the goods on some of the things that I wanted to hit, the themes that I wanted to hit for season 3. I'm really glad that she did. Today, we are going to be talking about some research that your organization has been doing, Whitney. And we're going to talk about this attack on Black women and what that means for us as Black women. Um, how we are navigating this and what you're seeing as you're doing the research and as you're doing your trainings with Service Never Sleeps. So,
Mm.
that being said, please introduce yourself. Welcome to the show.
Thank
Uh,
you. Thank you.
please introduce yourself with the identities that you're bringing to this conversation.
Sounds great. Sounds great. Thank you so much for having me, Whitney. I'm already really excited by this Whitney duo situation that's going to happen. Only power can come from this. So thank you so much for having me. My name is Whitney Parnell. My pronouns are she, her. I proudly identify as a powerful Black woman. I think those are staples of my identity for sure. I think it's also just important for me to recognize and acknowledge my areas of privilege, being straight and cisgender and non-disabled and Christian, because it's just a reminder of where I should be an ally and hold responsibility there. I also just think a lot about how musician is a very important part of my identity. Before anything else,
Hmm.
I'm a singer,
Wow.
actually. And so it's been interesting for me to reflect on in movement work and justice work when it's felt very overwhelming in the work, how it's almost like I've had to push music aside to give all my time and energy to the
Mm.
justice work, but realizing that a major piece of me is missing when I don't have music as a regular part of my life. So I just speak that more authentically now, that I very much identify as a musician, as a singer, and the last thing that I'll say is that I'm a third culture kid. So one of the most
Hmm.
stressful questions that I can be asked is where I'm from, because I'm Black American. My dad was with the Foreign Service. So I was literally born a
Mm.
few days after Christmas in Colorado where my grandparents live. And then a couple weeks after that was flying to Paraguay with my family. And I lived outside of the country until college. So it's an interesting
Wow.
identity to proudly be Black American, but have this lens of having grown up in the global South that was a beautiful, amazing experience that showed that humanity is wonderful, diversity is wonderful, and only makes us better. And that injustice is global and no society, no country is exempt from that. So those are the big identities, I would say.
Wow. See, and this is why even though I come up with questions, I wind up all over the place because so much of what you just said there are threads that I want to pull on. And the first is around your identities and identifying where you hold privilege. I know, and I'm
Mhm.
going to let you talk about your work soon, but I know allyship is a big part of your work, and it just one
Mhm.
of the things. So that kind of acknowledgement really resonates with me because one of the things that I've learned through doing this podcast is one, how different we all are, how different
Mhm.
Black Americans are, how different people of color are. You know,
Mhm.
I would go around saying people of color are not a monolith, Black people are not a monolith, but then like my experience is like, oh, we kind of are, but we're not, right? We are
Mhm.
not. And
Mhm.
it's been so great seeing and learning about all these other perspectives and then
Right.
seeing and being able to bring home for me how my identities really, do give me privilege that others who
Mhm.
I'm talking to through this show
Mhm.
um, don't experience. And
Mhm.
as Black women, a lot of the times we can be uh, I don't even want to call it down on ourselves because it is the reality that we are, if we want to talk about the hierarchy, class and socioeconomics and all of this, Black women, yes, we are near the very bottom.
Mhm.
Um, However, there's so much privilege in like being an American. There
Mhm.
is so much privilege in being Christian and not having to
Mhm.
defend my
Mm.
religion or my lack
Mhm.
of religion, even.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
there's so much privilege that I don't think about on a
Mhm.
daily basis because, by nature of it being a privilege. And so just thinking about allyship and thinking about how I use that privilege and that power to support other
Mhm.
people of color. Because the other thing is, as a Black woman, I sometimes kind of remove myself from the role of ally.
Mhm.
And I don't know if you run into this a lot in your work, but it's kind of like I'm already doing so much for myself. Like I don't have energy or this allyship talk isn't talking to me,
Yeah.
which is not the case.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
so, yeah, I really appreciated what you said about that. Um,
Mhm.
the second thing is around you being a musician, a
Yeah.
singer. I think
Yeah.
that that's amazing. And I am working on a project right now with a friend. That friend is an artist. We're working on race stuff.
Mhm.
And they said, we have this event coming up, and they said, I'm just really being called to do something with drawing, to do something with art, like for this group convening that we're planning. So much of our work falls on like the verbal communication, as we heal, as we learn, as we explore. It's through talk.
Mhm.
And this friend is constantly reminding me and showing me how art is another avenue for this kind of learning, for this kind of healing, for being in community with each other. And so I really hope that you get to use your art in that way as well as you kind of trudge along in the work that you're doing.
Thank you for that. And I will shameless plug. I dropped a social awareness album a couple of years ago called "What Will You Do?" So you can like find some of that. But what I'll also just
Yay!
say, I realize how it all just informs each other. Not only does it give me joy and energy to then pour back into the work, but I think one of my strengths in leadership is innovation and creativity and just dreaming up these ideas and then bringing it to life. And I think that that's actually rooted in my musicianship, or like what comes from that is musicianship and then entrepreneurship, right? Where like with music, I can't explain. I see the music, like I see the notes and everything, right? And it's about bringing different notes together to create these sounds and everything. So it all informs being able to be a creative, vibrant person in all the things that I do, including my work, as opposed to trying to keep it separate. So it's just about bringing all of me, which is the goal of this work, right? Being able to show up
Yeah,
authentically and freely and thrive in that.
yeah,
Hmm.
absolutely. Okay, so tell us about Service Never Sleeps.
Yeah, Service Never Sleeps. So we are about a 9-year-old organization. I like to say that we are a blackety black led organization unapologetically. We're a black led allyship racial justice org. So try to say that 5 times
Mhm,
over. And so I like to describe us that we serve as a resource for justice minded individuals and institutions looking to learn and act by empowering them with the tools and posture to be effective allies. So we're most known for our allyship training, which we do solely through a racial justice lens. That's meant for all identities. By effect, that puts us in a lot of predominantly white spaces. But as you said, BIPOC folks can be allies when it comes to intersectionality, when it comes to solidarity. So we're known for our allyship training that trains people to recognize, where do you have privilege? That's where you should be an ally, and this is how. And then we've also just recently launched a whole new project, a whole new program actually called the Black Led Project Program, which it's an extensive report guide and training around the holistic meaning of being a Black led organization and all the power and possibility that Black led orgs bring that people can learn from them. So I like to say that allyship is what we do and Black led is who we are. And we
mm,
always say that justice work is inside out work. So it's cool that that literally
mhm.
applies to our mission, that we are Black led that tries to practice allyship, and like we teach about Black led and allyship.
So let's talk about Black led because surely there are organizations that have Black people uh, who are leading the organization, but who we might necessarily consider those organizations Black led or
Mm-hmm.
Black informed or really Black
Mm-hmm.
anything.
Mm.
And so I'm curious from your perspective and from the perspective of this program that you're launching and your research, like what does Black led mean for an organization?
Thank you for that. And it's so interesting because so that what inspired this whole project for us was that when the 2020 Black Lives Matter uprising started and so many foundations were pledging to fund Black-led organizations, we applied for a bunch of the funding and got none of it. And
That's right.
fantastic orgs got the funding, but what was getting us was the reasoning, which they said that we weren't Black-led. And mind you, my co-founder, COO, and I are both Black people. And they said that our work didn't directly support Black people because it wasn't the paternalistic view of the only way to help Black people, which is direct service. It was training people to be pro-Black and unlearn their anti-Blackness. So we were just like,
That's
first of all,
deep.
that's not true. And secondly, that's not even the fullness of what being Black-led means. It's a vibe. It's a whole journey to showing up of authentic self and how that's infused into the culture of the organization where everybody else can do that too, and how all of that then impacts the work that is being done. So Black led is, yes, I would say that it's important to being Black led means that the majority of your staff leadership is Black, as well as your board is majority Black.
Mm,
Like that is important. But what this whole research about, it's about all the qualitative piece of it, and like a lot of the shoulds, right? Because as race equity practitioners, we infused in there what people were saying, because we really intentionally talked to Black folks who were trying to lead in this liberatory way, as well as like our insights about what an equitable justice liberatory organization is. So it's a lot of that showing up as authentic self. It's a lot around being people first organizations from the inside out, right? So how do you deeply care for your people through policies, through culture, through disposition, as well as the people that you are serving through proximity and that people first lens. Learned a lot about just one of the things that stands out most is the culture, and how
mm,
Black leaders like really invest in a culture of deep care and showing up as authentic self and joy. Because one thing that stands out so much about Blackness is that despite all that we deal with, somehow we still find a way to laugh the hardest together, to have the joy, all the things. So that piece around the internal culture was a big one. So
mm,
Black led is this amazing thing that is this both and of what folks are already doing and like unapologetically committing to. And I still do think about what it could be as a possibility, because the research showed that so many Black led orgs are minimally funded. So there are a lot of
Right.
dreams that Black leaders have in terms of the impact they would have, the investment in their staffs that they just can't even live into fully because they don't have those resources. So in short, Black led is a vibe that really everybody gains from. Because like when you have that kind of culture, that kind of disposition, anybody who's a part of that is going to benefit from that as well. So that's part of the beauty of Black led orgs, as well as that in their true states, everyone's benefiting from being a part of it.
Mm. Thank you. You said something at the outset, the paternalistic vision of serving Black communities, which is through direct service, and that's interesting. I haven't thought about that specifically, or maybe I haven't put the words to it, but it is something that I relate with, in my work as an attorney, as someone who so deeply cares about racial justice,
Mhm.
but finding that working I don't even know how to put it. So, yes, the expectation is direct service,
Mhm.
and how is that helping or hurting, the movement when that is the focus? That is where all the money goes, but there's not necessarily like what systemic, what institutional, what structural stuff are we also working on, when we're thinking about racial justice and when we're thinking about racial equity? And are those organizations also getting funding? Um, because my experience was there, as you said, there is funding. There are organizations that do direct services that are very needed. Like great work is being done,
Mm, mhm,
but when we get to the systemic stuff, it's slow.
mm,
It's really difficult to keep the momentum. It's really difficult to keep the people, like the
mhm,
people power there to
mm,
work through all of the inevitable
mm,
challenges. Um, and, I just am thinking about whether this is on purpose and how, and we've seen it, of course, throughout history, that systemic change that benefits Black people just takes a long time.
mhm,
And, so I'm left to believe that, yes, it is on purpose, but it's just really interesting when you think about
mhm,
the funding and the direct service.
mhm. Think it's so true. Check mark. And what I'll just add to that too is I think that some part of it as well is that truly addressing the systemic piece. The way I describe systemic is the energy that's happening all around, even when we're not touching it. That then becomes the air that we breathe and the water that we're drinking. And so part of why there is so much rejection as well is because really addressing the systemic means having to turn the mirror on self, right?
Mm,
And how we've breathed in that air and like our contributions there. So it's a lot easier to just give to the very important organizations that are addressing the symptoms of this virus. But like really having to fully invest in the virus and that air means that it's kind of got to go both ways in terms of what that means your investment, which is kind of everything, which means turning the mirror back on self. And if I may, my hardest days are when people think that they don't have work to do on themselves or just really reject this notion of having to do the self work. So yeah, it goes deep and broad, my friend.
it does, and the self-work, for me, it's like I laugh at myself these days, because, like, we are not I, as someone that's, like, deeply in this work, am not immune from, like, the fuck ups,
Yeah.
from perpetuating, um, white supremacy, from causing harm, from perpetuating oppression, and so, uh at this point in my life, I'm having to just take myself with a grain of salt and like I'm learning. We are all learning together. And so, what is the community that I can be a part of that embraces that part of me, that embraces the part that is self aware, and that honors that self awareness?
I appreciate that. And it's so true because, yeah, I have to reckon with that all the time, not just as an individual with all the areas of privilege that I have and the ways that I am systemically complicit every day, all the time, but also as a leader of an organization and the power that comes with that, right? And so,
Mhm.
one thing that guilt is something that I need to work on. I can really struggle with that mistake that I made, especially the harm that it caused. And the other side of it, though, I will say that for as much as so often people want to reject this notion of being wrong, there is so much freedom and liberty in like the humility of being like, I am a vessel, a flawed vessel that is making mistakes, because that means I can learn from them. I can grow. I don't have to have all the answers, but like I'm opened up to being able to be better, and to just know that the error is coming. I think the flip side of that coin though is that just because I have power as a boss, that intersection of Black womanhood causes a lot of damage regardless of my power. It makes me powerless in some ways. And the challenge of, while we're all flawed, we're going to make mistakes, humility is so important in this work to learn and grow. It does seem like there's little to no grace for Black women to make those mistakes. And that literally there's no room for error actually without it severely impacting the rest of your position, the rest of your life, etc. So it's interesting to hold those things
Yeah.
where I know that there's growth learning that I always need to do, but am I always getting the grace to do that? Not necessarily. So then that makes me feel like I
Yeah,
got to be
no.
perfect, right? So it becomes this cycle, but I will stop there before I spiral downward.
Okay, so I just feel like we're at a great point to start talking about the research that you've done, and then to segue into this attack that we're experiencing on Black women, because even as you're talking about this lack of grace, like not only it's just it hurts my heart how deeply this is felt amongst our
Mm,
peers, and I'm so grateful that folks like you and your organization are doing the research, because it's so validating to know that, like,
mm,
I'm not making this up. I'm not making
mm,
it up.
mhm.
So tell us about the Black-led research.
Well, first of all, I can be right alongside you in those feelings, because I can't tell you just how healing, affirming, and clarifying it was to be doing this research alongside being the leader of a Black-led organization that was growing ourselves, because it helped me affirm that I'm not alone in this. This is systemic. So, uh, where to even start? I'll say I talked about a little bit, but I just want to first off say that Black-led organizations are amazing. And our original intention, I remember when I decided we were going to do this, because I was navigating all those rejections of being told that we're not Black-led. So I was on a walk and I called our COO, Samson, who knows his answer that phone for whatever is on the other side of the on the other line. We're great friends. We met over a decade ago serving together in AmeriCorps on the same team, and so 10 years later are now running this org together. So there's that
Wow.
relationship there. So he knows to answer that phone. And so I called him and I was just like, we need to do a research project where we take back our power to talk to only Black people about what being Black-led means. So originally it was to more thoroughly define the meaning of Black-led beyond these traditional numbers and qualifiers. And what was uncovered and really affirmed is that Black-led organizations are so incredible and can really set the example of liberatory leadership for all organizations. Because, like I said, some of the things that we got as findings were that Black people bring a unique perspective to community solutions based on our experience. And the data shows over and over again that if you center Black people's needs, everybody's going to gain from that. Right. And so, like, there's already so much power in folks who are proximate to these issues with the perspective of experience being the one to lead change in these communities, right? The other thing that I said earlier around just the people first priority, and how that goes from the inside out, from equitable policies to benefits to the culture and climate of like community joy, care, wellness. um, I'd say another thing that just has to be lifted is the hardships that Black leaders deal with and Black-led
Mm,
orgs deal with.
mhm.
It was really important for us that how we framed this report and this training is to certainly name those and acknowledge those, but not make the whole thing be about just how difficult it is for us, right? But it's still important to name the very unique challenges that Black leaders faced, enhanced ones that any organizational leader faces, but it's enhanced because you're Black, but then specific unique ones to Black people, particularly in terms of like being undermined, being disrespected, not just externally, but internally as well. Just the toll of being so proximate to this work, right? And the literal weathering and health toll from having to face these traumatic issues day in and day out, having to do um, so much with so little, and like the pressure of just not being able to fail, because that reinforces stereotypes, and because that can result in the lack of our jobs, the closing of our organizations, and a big one being that we just get less funding, period, and all the implications behind
Mm,
that. And then another big one was that we need support, right? That Black leaders deserve to thrive
yeah.
out of principle, and that a thriving Black leader leads to a thriving organization. And so Black led org needs to be supported for sustainability for the organization and also for the leader. It's that both and that also a big aspect of that support should come from community. That Black leaders need community with other Black leaders for that shared experience, for that accountability, for that growth together, for that problem solving. So much of this was really helpful because as I was like, as it was being synthesized, it then informed how I moved. And that was a big one for me, where now,
Mm.
I'm not kidding, Whitney, literally every week I have to engage with at least three other Black leaders, Black women leaders, because that just has to be a part of my time. And it's been so transformative for how I lead. So that community piece was another big one. So those are some of the big findings.
Well, yeah, and I mean, this isn't surprising to me,
Mm-hmm,
especially about the community piece,
mm-hmm,
because like I'm a firm believer in needing community for healing,
mm-hmm,
and I think this work is, in some aspects, healing work.
mm-hmm,
We are directly addressing the systemic, interpersonal, structural, you know, results
mm-hmm,
of white supremacy,
mm-hmm,
of enslaving Black people,
mm-hmm,
African people, of genocide against indigenous people. Like, this is all there are direct through lines,
mm-hmm,
even to the point of how we work,
mm-hmm.
how people in the United States work, how women, Black women, are experiencing that when they are exceeding in their work, they're being given more and more and more to do without the recognition and without the pay, and thinking
Mhm,
about just how this is what happened in slavery,
mhm,
when we had to pick cotton, or we had to pick other, grains and other things from the fields, and if we couldn't keep up with how well we were doing
mm,
from day to
mm,
day to day, then there
mm,
would be
mm,
punishment. So the reward was continuing to have
mm,
life,
mhm,
continuing to have a job, not being physically harmed for not excelling.
mhm,
Um, so this work for me is really healing, because it helps me process
mhm.
all of these realizations
Yes.
that I have as I continue on this learning journey, and as I get to teach others and work in collaboration with others to kind of help chip away at some of these
For
systems.
sure. And I'm so grateful because to, to your point about the processing, because I'm very hard on myself, right? And like I said, I want feedback, I want to be better, I want to know when I'm wrong. But I was realizing how much I was contorting myself based on like contrasting
Mhm.
feedback, and uh, for me doing exactly what was asked, and all the gaslighting, when people throw around that term gaslighting, but actual gaslighting. And so this project and this research just helped me get clarity on, oh, this is systemic, and this is happening here too. And all these things are what make it systemic. So I'm not the problem here. I am the vessel that is enduring all the harm. So it was really, really helpful. But I also want to say that it was inspiring and energizing as well, because again, there were so many great examples of Black folks just bringing all the greatness to their orgs, right? And like with Black culture and how we always find joy and innovation and everything, that same practice applied institutionally as well. So it's also really just inspiring and energizing to see all the creativity, the innovation, and be like, oh, we're going to try that over here now. And oh, that's a great policy.
Right.
Let's do that. And hey, maybe we should implement that as well. So community is so important. It was an amazing thing to be able to build new community from this project and
Mm.
interviewing these almost 120 folks and almost having a 2 year long community experience by just talking to Black folks. So yes, it's
Mhm.
been community is everything really.
Were there findings that surprised you
Hmm.
from this research?
Thanks for that question. I don't know if I was necessarily surprised. I say a lot was affirmed and clarified as I was running this org. I think particularly around the internal challenges. Admittedly, my call it
Mm,
naive self coming into this, I knew that it was going to be hard being a millennial Black woman interfacing externally and trying to get support be taken seriously. I was taken aback by how difficult the challenges from within would be, in regards to being seen
mm,
as the angry Black woman when I just tried to lead, right? Like the mammy who's supposed to be taking care of everybody, the magical superwoman who's supposed to be able to do all things, which I've got to attribute Kirian Swatters for coming up with those three tropes, right? Like I must admit I was not prepared for how much that would happen. So it really clarified a lot of the internal challenges. And I think that there were things that were straight up alarming, like the health toll of this
mm,
work and just
mm,
how detrimental it can be. And even in this process of research, colleagues of mine having traumatic health things come up, having lost a few colleagues who passed away, where we know that it directly had to do with the toll of this work. So it was very alarming to just see how prevalent like our health can be impacted by this. And like I said, other things were inspiring and energizing in terms of ideas and revolutionary and radical stuff. So I don't know if the word is surprising, but I certainly took so much and gained so much and got things clarified and put into different buckets of reaction from there.
yeah, I just talked to countless people, in doing this podcast, but in other areas as well, who are experiencing or did experience that health component of it. And it is alarming. It is, and everybody knows, at this point, it's maybe at the beginning of the illness or the, whatever it was, "Oh, I'm trying to figure out what this is," but now it's, "I know what this is, and I know why this is."
Mm-hmm.
And what's been really amazing is seeing and for me specifically, I've been talking to women a lot. Um, so hearing about what these Black women are doing for themselves
Mm-hmm.
to heal from that physical disease or from that mental health issue, what they're doing to take time away, people taking risks, that they never thought that they would take, like
Mm-hmm.
leaving their corporate jobs,
Mm-hmm.
getting off of the ladder or the stairwell and just, like, enjoying being at home
Mm-hmm.
with their families, enjoying being like a homemaker,
Mm-hmm.
which I grew up not wanting to do that at
Mm-hmm.
all, and I still don't, frankly, I still don't, but what I do see and what I do feel in this last, year of, working for myself, of kind of switching up a little bit of what I'm focusing my energy on is that working on my home is therapeutic, working on my home life is therapeutic,
Mm-hmm.
and I didn't have a lot of time to do like, it always felt like a struggle to just take that kind of time,
Mm-hmm.
um, to care for some of these spaces that I
Mm-hmm.
that I inhabit, that I live in with my family, you know? Um, and so it's just been really cool to see how people are adjusting and adapting and accepting what their reality is, like the level of stress,
Mm-hmm.
that they are actually undergoing and then doing something about it.
Thank you for that. I've literally been, you can see on my face, like I've been processing out loud as you've been sharing this out loud and holding two things. one, just I've been really thinking about this notion of healing. And you've got DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And we always talk about how the D and I aren't enough. You've got to get to the equity to eliminate disparities so people are set up to thrive. But I've been thinking a lot about this full justice pie and how equity makes
Right.
up most of the pie, but that remainder is repair, healing. And I've been thinking about what does that mean in application to institutional work? Because you know that Malcolm X uh, uh, phrase, and I'm butchering it, but he says something like, "If you stab me 9 inches and pull out the knife 6 inches," and I apologize for like the violent imagery here. He's like, that's not it, and he's like, but if you just pull out the knife altogether, that's not it either. You've got to actually heal the wound. I've been thinking about like, okay, institutionally healing the wound would be equity. But what about all those folks, all those Black women who have been at the org for all this time amidst all this harm, that even if, okay, equity is in place, they still have all that trauma from what went on. And I can speak to that personally, right? Like just still trying to deal with and recover from what happened, even if it's not happening now. So what does like this justice
Yeah.
piece of healing and repair look like in an institution? And so on the one end, I really celebrate what you're talking about Black women really taking radical control and pursuing healing and health externally where they can. But I also reframe it as a challenge to institutions where what does it mean that Black women are having to go to get that? And like
Right.
what charges there on institutions, especially that cause the harm and the need to heal in the first place, providing that space for healing internally, which in some ways, I don't know that you can fully institutionalize that like as a blanket thing. Some ways it's really setting people up to do what they need to do for their own healing, but we can't keep being told that it's on us to go find community for support, to go get our healing. Where does it become everybody else's responsibility to ensure that for us?
Absolutely.
So yeah, so many wrestlings that I'm dealing with right now.
Yeah, because like, what is this like, the question that I'm hearing you ask is, what does it actually look like? What is the actual like, what are the policies, the reparative policies that we're putting in place in these institutions, um, for those institutions that are wanting to have accountability to the harm that
Yeah,
they've caused?
yeah. Because like and again, I'm sorry for the violence. That like stabbing analogy and healing the wound, that's the equity, but what about the trauma of having been stabbed? Right? And like that's the part. How do
Yeah.
you fix everything, but there's still something to be fixed, which is the healing from all of that damage. And questions,
Yeah.
questions.
Well, and frankly, I'm a burn it down girl.
Uh-huh.
So,
Uh-huh.
like, I don't want the old
Mhm.
infrastructure of
Mhm.
things
Mhm.
that have done
Mhm.
harm.
Mhm.
I want new
Mhm.
infrastructure. Um, but we can't have that. Because what happens in the
Yeah.
meantime for this, legal services agency that has 200 clients, and they can't just stop everything and come up with their new with their new framework. Um, but it's a good question because what I'm feeling as, someone that used to be somebody's employee is that I don't wanna stick around to find out.
Mhm.
So and I also do people have trust in the organization that that organization is actually going to do what it takes. Like,
Mhm.
I feel
Mhm.
like part of the trauma is the mistrust, or maybe what results from the trauma is the mistrust. Um, and so it's too, like, how do I, as somebody that has been harmed, uh, have the courage, the strength, the trust, the whatever we need to then communicate my harm, whether or not my future healing has anything to do with the future of the organization.
Mhm.
Because again, that's work that we are having to do as the people that are harmed, is sharing what our experience has been. Um, and understanding that a lot of folks who are in positions of power in these organizations, or not in positions of power, but who are helping to cause this toxic environment have no idea.
Mm,
They have no idea.
mhm. Yeah.
And I think, as consultants, I see a lot of time this is our role of is being the one that communicates the
Right.
harm. Um, being the one that helps an executive director or a manager or just a colleague understand the impact of, whatever the policy, the action, the whatever it's going to be, so that there is not a reliance on the people that are actually being harmed in real time
Yeah.
to do that thing.
Yeah.
Um, but it is very like I don't know what the answer is. I struggle with this. You mentioned justice, and you and I have talked about this before. Like I struggle with this on the broader scale, having to do with justice and having to do with our criminal legal system. I don't see a way for there to be reparation within our current criminal legal system. So what does
I
that
agree.
mean for our criminal legal
Right.
system? Um, I'm somebody that tried to work from within the criminal legal
Yeah.
system to achieve some kind of justice, but the fact of the matter is we don't know what justice is.
Mm,
Uh, we don't know what justice feels like. We don't agree on what justice is.
mhm.
And so it's like these kind of big kind of philosophical questions that I think get us down to I think they contextualize some of the challenge that we are up against when we're talking about um, Black women, Black people at work, when we're talking about attacks on Black women in the workplace, when we're talking about affirmative action and DEI and critical race theory, which
Mhm.
now mean the same thing politically. Like
Mhm.
it's all the it's all the same
Don't get me
thing,
started.
even though it's not. But, because for me, these things, DEI, affirmative action, critical race theory being like clear and direct about what our history is, all of these are necessary
Mm,
for
mhm,
reparation,
mhm.
for justice, for equity. Yet we are not at a point as a country where we're able to accept this type of learning.
Still. And I don't know how many more reminders we need that until you truth tell, that virus will keep on getting infected and repackaged, and you really cannot fully move forward by just brushing it aside or acting like it didn't happen. So but I always say I'm working toward a hope, right? What is possible, and knowing that the work toward that means the both and all. Burn some stuff down, some stuff can't, but work from within. Individually recognizing how far you are willing to like be the one to work within versus when you just realize it goes against your values to be there and go somewhere else, right? Like it's doing as much as we can in the everyday. And what has helped me settle in is being like, um, hope is this belief that we can build better tomorrows than today. So I can just get really
Mm,
overwhelmed by how big everything is because it's everywhere. And so what I commit myself is how can I be my best to make tomorrow better and contribute as much as I can there. And I'm just learning the power of trying to take it a day at a time. And that in that day of pushing, also having the space for healing, community, joy, music, all the things to be able to push again, moving forward. But it's interesting, this question around who's the one to do it and everything, because I think as a practitioner a lot of times it's race equity officers that will ask us to come in and do
right.
the training, to which I'm always like, I could never be the race equity officer. I could never be the one who's within the institution just constantly trying to push. It's so hard because our role is to come in, say the thing, blow it up and leave. So I
Right.
appreciate being able to play that role for the folks who are internally pushing. um it's interesting when you talk about how a lot of times leaders have no idea, because a lot of times when that race equity audit is done as the first part of the work, as soon as they get that information they reject and say, no, we're not even moving forward with this contract, right? So there is something to be said about, there's one thing not to know, but what once you do know, what are you going to do about that? But what I also
Right.
celebrate is a lot of times when we do trainings, it's from the leader of the org who has hired us and who has said, "I know we need to commit to this, and I'm not the like I don't know this, so can you come in?" So there's in every space, there's a room for the frustration, the disheartenment, but also the hope and the possibility and the reminder that enough people want to do this that we really can just create this world that we are working towards. So I just got to keep that hope as my North Star.
So let me ask you, over this past year, we've seen various examples of Black women who are needing to leave their positions, who are having major health issues, who have unfortunately died by
Mm,
suicide based on the pressure that they've experienced in their workplace. And, we talk about attacks on Black women in the workplace, and
mm,
we know what we're talking about. But can you share with me, and before I ask you, I was reading through one of the pieces that you and Carrion did in Nonprofit Quarterly, and you talk about Black, like, I forget the exact language, but it was essentially that everyone is watching this happen to Black women and not watching it from like high up, like you can see it happening over there,
mm,
not from a historical context, but from a
mm,
you are sitting across the conference room table
mm,
from me, and you are
mm.
seeing this dynamic go on and on and on. So what is that we're talking about when we talk about this hostility, this reality that many Black women are experiencing in their workplaces?
So much. And what I will just say is that whole Nonprofit Quarterly issue is about Black women and women of color leaders, and just all of it just wrapped up into one thorough piece. And so I just invite people to read that because it's just firsthand accounts of just how deep it goes. And, on the one end, we've always been disrespected and mistreated, right? In ways that's nothing new. Like when you talk about just the history of slavery and everything, society's disposition systemically to Black women is, pardon my language for being so direct, but I think of Trisha Hersey in Rest is Resistance, her book, saying that Black women are society's mules, right? People have only known to completely extract from us,
Right,
and then once there's nothing left to extract, then there's no more value and keep moving. There's no care, right? And so part of it is that systemically we've always been disrespected and mistreated, and that's nothing new. But I think the particulars of this season have been the influx of Black women who were hired into leadership and equity positions during the uprising, the Black Lives Matter uprising of 2020. And so just more clearly seeing this mistreatment and straight up rejection of our leadership through the sheer volume. And so you see it showing up as people getting fired or demoted for saying the thing and speaking the truth, which is what it's so interesting, right? Because the same thing that we're criticized for is what people depend on us for. Like people depend on the Black woman to be the one who's courageous to say the thing and take all the heat for it because somebody's got to. But then at the same time, that's what's getting us fired and in trouble, right? People
yeah,
are receiving so much pushback and defiance from their own teams and boards as if they're not the leaders of the organization. People, as I talked about earlier, just have no room for error, period, and are being expected to carry inhumane loads or clean up decades long messes that they were just put in this organization to do. And so when that's not possible, being blamed and punished for it, almost as proof that we weren't deserving of the role in the first place. And
right.
just seeing that it being so bad that Black women either leave because they just can't take it, or their health forces them to because it's too much, or sadly they lose their lives. And not only is that so alarming, but I've really been thinking about how we should require more of society. It can't be the case that we've got this false choice of either lead as martyrs because of the scenario for us, or leave and not be able to be the great full leaders that we are. And then furthermore, other people are missing out on that too. Other people are missing out on the beauty specialness
Right.
of Black women leadership. So I'd say that's how it's showing up. I know you had some questions about like, you kind of went in a little bit into like what to do about it, but I'll just pause there because I realize I threw a lot there. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I appreciate your repeatedly coming back to, like, whose job is it?
Mm-hmm.
And it can't just be
Mm-hmm.
on us.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and what is, the responsibility of the rest of society?
Mm-hmm.
And I think, how you talk about your allyship work, really lends itself to that message of like, no, we all literally have privilege
Mm-hmm.
that we can use, um, to be allies. And I'm just thinking about times that I have interacted with my Black leadership in a way that, um, frankly, was not okay.
Mm-hmm.
And feeling like I have higher expectations, of Black
Mm-hmm.
leaders because of, you know, what I experienced as a Black woman of needing to do all the things, of needing to do
Mm-hmm.
more, because of this feeling of, well, you know what it's like, so you, Black woman leader, are gonna be trying, harder than anybody else for this fight type of thing, um, and now it's just when I am interacting with Black female leaders,
Mm-hmm.
we talked about grace a little bit earlier, and I just allow so much grace because I don't want to be perpetuating that type of pressure. I don't want to have these high expectations on people, um, when I wouldn't have that same expectation on somebody who was not a Black woman. Um, and it's difficult because it's holding the, like, dire need for, like, there has to be something else, there has to be progress, there has to be change, um, with the respect and the grace that Black women deserve.
Mm-hmm. Well, first of all, I just really want to appreciate this moment and like your humility of naming that, because one thing that has been very glaring is that what makes it systemic is then what happens within the institution, regardless of identity. Right? And so I just
Mhm,
really appreciate your personal example, because I've come to see identity can certainly impact our bias and posture, but it doesn't exempt us from being complicit in these
right.
systems. So those three tropes from our article of angry mammy superwoman, like they showed up in different ways depending on identity, but it was happening broadly. So I think it's so important to recognize that the systemic thing happening here is Black women leaders, right? And to that point, like where I have leaders, how do I make sure that I am not being complicit in that way as well? And so, I process from two different lanes. Like on the one level, like a high level is just the fact that we just need to be believed, right? Like
Mm,
I can't express how often I've said like this is a really harmful thing and it's not believed, it's not taken seriously, or even when I've had the vulnerability of saying just how difficult something is, I've faced repercussions for it, right? Like I've been told that that's not good leadership, that's not inviting people to be under your leadership, right? Like I can't say that I've been reacted to well for when I vulnerably said this is what's happening here. So for as much as people say we don't know what we don't know, well, we've been saying it a lot. And so we do need to be believed. I was talking to a Black man who runs an organization that actually teaches management and like being an employee, and a Black man, and he was saying how, everybody's like trust Black women, support Black women, believe Black women until a Black woman tells us what to do. And then we're like, hold on now. And he was like, and I recognize that in myself as someone who leads teaching people how to be managed and stuff, right? So like there's something to be said about just being believed and taken seriously. And then the other part being that then something needs to be done about it. Like part of me just gets exhausted from having these conversations, because I feel like on the one hand, I'm so glad that this is a season where we are speaking out. Like this is the conversation that we are
mhm,
like, enough. It almost kind of like when Simone Biles in the Olympics took a step back, and Black women were just like, yes, because there was that
Mhm.
eruption of just what that meant from saying, I will look out for me and cannot do this right now. I'm feeling like a similar eruption this year of us speaking out about the
Yes.
things, Um, but where I get exhausted is I'm like, what privilege allows is there's one part of just not knowing, but then the other part is that once we have
Mm.
been informed, we get to decide whether we do something about it. And I think what will break no, I won't say that, but what would be very disappointing is in this time of so many Black women giving the emotional labor of these kinds of conversations. Yes, it'll be great if people are really moved by that and like really feel compassion and believe us. But if nothing changes, then we're still right here,
Right.
just further exhausted from having said all the things, and further losing some hope in the chance that anything can change when we've said it. So I do think about that. But the other part that I'll just close with speaking to the hope is that I do have personal examples of just so much support even leading this org. Like, I've talked about the Black women, and so I'm so glad we're in community now, right? Like, I have so many Black women where I've only experienced abundance from Black women in this space. Like, so much of the money, the connections, the work has come from other Black women being like, here you go, let me connect you, right? Like, Black women have saved me in this work. But even within the institution, Samson Gurma, he's our co-founder and COO. We share being Black, but he's a man, right? And like he uses that privilege as my ally. He protects me, right? He believes me and supports me. And the research has shown how important it is to have a partner in Black leadership. And so, as a Black woman, to have a
Mm.
Black man, I will never
Mm.
take for granted just how special it is to be able to have that beside me. I think of
Yeah.
our advisor, a Black man, Niels Rubero Yomofio, who runs a nonprofit himself and like has been so incredible in terms of infusing across our organization what it means to be in support of me. I think about an amazing ally on our board, Natalia Oyola Sepulveda, who has been the demonstration of what it means to be of deep support, care, investment. We have a Black woman chair, Afia Amobia Sechi, right, who gets it, right? And so I don't have to explain anything because we
Right.
do it, and she's a practitioner herself. So I do just have to also speak to, as hard as it has been, what has saved me has been having people support me and having real life examples of the fact that like that support, that allyship based on disposition is possible. So that's the hope that I will give.
Yeah.
Hmm.
I think that's a great note to end on, and it brings me back to, one of the early questions that I asked you about what does it mean to be Black-led, and you talked about community, and what I'm hearing is, like, more than anything, um, being Black-led requires community, and not just for whoever is being served by the organization, um, but for the people within the organization, for this work to be sustainable. Because Lord knows there's literally everything out to get
Yeah.
us.
Oh yeah.
There's so many barriers to success for Black entrepreneurs, for Black leaders, for Black founders, for Black people.
Hmm.
Still, and having that community to me feels like a
Oh my
fortress.
gosh.
Um,
Thank you for that, Whitney.
yeah,
I just have to say, I feel like you just took this to the next level to wrap it up in such an amazing bow, not just in terms of ending this conversation, but just the implications of why being Black led is disruptive in the most amazing, powerful, healing way that anybody can learn from and be better, because white supremacy culture trains us in the opposite. It trains us in
right.
individualism, hustle on your own, compete, get to the top on your own, share nothing with nobody, when really community relationship, that's the point of life. That is how Black people have like thrived amidst all the hardships. And so by centering that as priority from the inside out, right, from within the org to everybody, not just the leaders, but also folks within the org being able to build external community. It's disruptive, it's transformative, it's liberatory, and it makes the work better. It makes the actual
Right.
mission better. So thank you for just wrapping a bow on that. That's not just what being Black led is, but that is shining the light on what true liberation needs and looks like. So I appreciate you.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. Thank you so much. I appreciate you for sharing this conversation with me. So, where can folks learn more about you and find out the work of Service Never Sleeps?
Thank you so much for that. I would say just go to anything Service Never Sleeps. So our website, serviceneversleeps.org, and then all the social media is Service Never Sleeps as well. And so you can find all the info, all the things that we're doing, the Black Led Project report, as well as opportunities to take the training and our allyship training all through our website and the associated platforms.
Thank you so much. I really appreciated this conversation.
I appreciate you, sis. Thank you for what you're doing.
Thank you so much for listening to Impostrix Podcast. I appreciate your support and that you continue to listen week after week after week. I've got some exciting news, which is that you can now listen and support Impostrix Podcast on the Alive Podcast Network app. You will find ad-free listening to nearly 100 other Black-hosted podcasts, in addition to Impostrix Podcast, and you'll be able to support those podcasts and really kind of get into your groove with that app. I hope that you will join me over there. I appreciate your support. To connect with me, feel free to join me on Instagram at Impostrix Podcast. You can also join me on Facebook in our validating space. Just search for Impostrix Podcast. All right, until next time, be validated.